Louis Pasteur, conqueror of disease. Then on a certain day all the animals were injected with the most deadly anthrax germs that could be produced. On the third day after the experiment, a crowd of people gathered round the sheds to see what had happened to the animals. Pasteur, even though he was so sure of himself, must have felt nervous. All the 24 animals that had first been protected by the weak germs were perfectly well. The deadly injection had done them no harm at all. Of the other 24 animals, 22 were dead and the other 2 were dying. When the news spread that Pasteur had discovered a cure for anthrax, hundreds of people wrote to him for supplies of vaccine or weak germs, and he had to turn his laboratory into a kind of small germ factory. Pasteur received many honors from the French government, and in 1881 he came to a big medical congress in London. When he walked down the hall, there was a storm of applause. He looked round, thinking that the cheers must be for some royal person, for Pasteur could hardly believe that the applause was meant for him. One of his last experiments was in connection with the terrible disease which attacks a person who is bitten by a dog with rabies, a mad dog as we call it. Pasteur had grown very sure about the power of inoculation, and he decided to try out the same idea in cases of rabies. At that time nearly everyone died who was bitten by a diseased dog. In 1885 Pasteur made his first experiment on a young Alsatian boy who came to him in Paris covered with bites from a mad dog. The boy's mother told Pasteur, "If you can cure animals, you can cure my son." So Pasteur inoculated him with some weak rabies germs and the boy recovered. Although Dr. Jenner had already discovered how to vaccinate against smallpox, he did not really understand about bacteria. Pasteur, after giving his life to this study, was able to prove the value of inoculation, and to find out ways of varying it for different diseases. During the First World War, 1914-18, the troops going abroad were inoculated against such diseases as typhoid and enteric fever, and the very low death rate from these illnesses among the troops, even in unhealthy places, was a great tribute to Pasteur's work. Pasteur's memory is still honored in the Institut Pasteur in Paris, where bacteriology is studied by men of all nations. At the opening of the institute in 1888, Pasteur said, "Two opposing laws seem to me now in contest. The one, a law of blood and death, opening out each day new methods of destruction, forces nations to be always ready for the battle. The other, a law of peace, work and health, whose only aim is to deliver man from the disasters which surrounded him. The one seeks violent conquests, the other the relief of mankind. Which of these two laws will prevail God only knows, but of this we may be sure, that science in obeying the law of humanity will always labor to enlarge the frontiers of life." Someone who knew Pasteur well in his old age described him thus: "Weary, with deep lines on his face, the skin and beard both white, his hair still thick and nearly always covered with a black cap, the broad forehead wrinkled, marked with the lines of genius, the mouth slightly drawn by paralysis, but full of kindness. And above all, the living thought which still flashes from the eyes beneath the deep shadow of the eyebrows." On Pasteur's 70th birthday his jubilee was celebrated almost like a national festival. Like Lord Lister, He was honored in his old age by the scientists of all nations. At the crowded meeting in the Great Hall of the University of Paris, the old man was too overcome to speak, and his speech was read to the distinguished audience by his son. "The future," he said, "will belong to those who shall have done the most for suffering humanity." To the young students he addressed a special word: "First ask yourselves, what have I done for my education? Then as you advance in life, what have I done for my country? So that someday that supreme happiness may come to you, the consciousness of having contributed in some measure to the progress and welfare of humanity." Pasteur himself certainly knew that happiness. He died in 1895 when he was 75, and no name in science is more honored or will longer be remembered.